Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between. My name is Alex McCall, and I am a pretty good author. I've had 2 books published, I've won 2 national awards, and I've got a degree in script writing. But I wasn't always, so let me tell you about the first book I ever wrote, when I was 14. It was called Demon Hunters. And it was basically just a big pile of teenage angst, self-insert characters, and way too many ellipses. It was kind of trash. But I was looking through my computer recently and I realised I still have it. And I thought, usually when you read published books, you're reading the finished product, which has been polished to as close to perfect as it can be. You don't see all the failed attempts. So I thought it might be fun to read through this, see what I did right and all the many, many things I did wrong. Now, a few important things to cover before we get into it. I'm a bit face blind, so I often forget to describe what characters look like. Secondly, I'm terrible with thinking up names, and so I mostly just named characters after classmates. As this is okay for a personal novel, but probably not something I want to actually put online, I've changed those, so if I stumble over names, it's because I'm not used to them. Finally, and most importantly, I saw the Hugh Jackman film Van Helsing at an impressionable age, and to this day, I think it's the height of coolness. I've not read this book in at least 5 years, so believe me, this is going to be as fresh and painful an experience for me as it will be for you. With all of that out of the way, let's begin.
Demon Hunters by Alex von Karlstein.
Yeah. So back then I thought I needed a pen name so that I wouldn't get mixed up with Alexander McCall Smith. And in my infinite wisdom, I chose Alex von Karlstein. That should probably be a warning of what we're getting into.
Prologue. He looked just like any other man with a boring job in an office. He wore a grey suit and sat in a grey office. In fact, grey described everything about him. His office had grey walls with a few grey metal bookshelves stuck to them. The books all looked like they were about boring things, like the joys of banking and exploring Pythagorean theorem. Guess who wasn't doing well in maths? They were all bound in grey leather. Apart from that, it was empty, just a large space in a desk by the window, outside which grey snow was blowing. The desk, grey metal, was covered with neat piles of paper. He was a man who looked like he never got excited, one who it would be hard to imagine having a life outside the office. At the moment, however, he was leaning back in his leather chair, grey, and staring at the boy in front of him. The boy was just about the only colourful thing in this room, and that was saying a lot because he was dressed all in black. He stood out from the room in other ways too. He was scruffy, and his clothes, a long black leather jacket and a wide-brimmed hat, looked like they would be more at home at a biker's convention or prison. They were clothes that just screamed concealed weapons and looked completely out of place in this neat office. The rest of his appearance didn't help. In fact, it made him look like a very large crow. He had several deep-looking scars on his face, and his hair fell in long strands over his eyes. And it was these eyes that caught the man behind the desk's attention. They were deep dark blue, and seemed to draw everything into them. They looked like they had seen too much for someone who was just 17 years old. I'm fairly sure this character was 14 when I started writing, but I spent 3 years on it, so I'm guessing I just aged them up to current age every time I went through. The man took all this in, still unable to believe that someone this young had gone through all that he had and was standing in front of him. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the report that told the story about this boy, and perched his chin on his tented fingers. "So what happened, Erhard?" "I do have the report here, but I'd much rather hear it from you." Even the man's voice was boring, the long drawl perfected by all those who work in boring jobs, or those who like to send their audience to sleep. Like teachers. Yay, edgy teen Alex. At the sound of the voice, the boy, who had been called Erhard, jumped slightly. He stood straight and looked at the man behind the desk. "Of course, sir," he said. His voice was deep, and yet held a faintly musical quality. It all started about 6 months ago.
Honestly, not terrible. Doesn't really tell us much, but builds it up okay. And I kind of like the repeated use of the word grey. I don't think it works, but I like what, young Alex was trying to do. Now, there's 2 ways to open a novel. Either you can do a slow build like this, where you slowly introduce people to the world, or you can just throw people straight into the action. As you're about to see, young Alex decided to do both.
Chapter 1. It was dark and she was running. Behind her she could hear the pounding of chasing feet, getting closer, rustling the leaves on the ground and snapping twigs and branches from the trees all around them. Beside her she could see her twin running, seemingly as frightened as her, but there was a glint in her eye that seemed to hint that she was enjoying herself. She spared a second to reflect on this, but the pursuer was getting closer behind her. She was just jumping over an outstretched root when it happened. The root seemed to reach up and grab her foot, sending her crashing to the ground. She just had time to turn round before the thing chasing them caught her. It was a huge monstrosity, with curly horns growing out of its head, razor sharp claws reaching for her. She managed to get most of her screen out before it was cut off by her throat being ripped out. As she slipped into the waiting blackness of death, she heard her twin cry out in pain. That's odd, she thought. They didn't catch her. Then she woke up. Yes, not only am I double dipping on starting a story, I also decided to start with a dream sequence. Yep, teenage Alex made some choices. The dream still vivid in her mind, Olivia sat up in bed. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw that Ellie was also awake. She looked quite white. They stayed quiet for the moment, then Ellie said, "Did you dream it too?" Olivia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She was still trembling. Ellie noticed this and said, "It was quite exciting, wasn't it?" This finally roused Olivia. "Exciting? I got killed! It was okay for you, you didn't get hurt. I had my throat ripped out." Ellie frowned. "I did get hurt. I feel some of what you feel, remember?" There's better ways to introduce that information. Olivia sighed. This was just like Ellie. She always had to win. She was the dominant twin. So instead of replying, she just got up and started to get dressed. As Ellie did the same, Olivia again thought about their relationship, as you do. Sometimes it was hard to believe that they were even related, let alone twins. They were complete opposites. Ellie was tall with dark hair and mood to match, sometimes. Olivia, however, was short, pale, timid, and had hair so light a blonde that it was practically silver. The only similarities between them were the fact that they were both slim and both had bright, shining green eyes. Ellie was the better-looking one. She was the one all the boys wanted to go out with. She never did. She always laughed in their faces. That didn't stop them, but they never really understood why Ellie never went out with anyone. Sometime, Olivia thought, neither did Ellie. At that moment, a banging on the door brought her back to reality. Someone yelled, "Breakfast time! Get downstairs now!" That was the other thing, of course. They didn't actually know if they were siblings. They had been found on a doorstep with a note saying that they were twins and to look after them. That's why they were stuck in this orphanage with no one wanting them and no real parents to talk to. No one had ever been interested, apart from, apparently, all of the boys. And in some ways, that was a good thing. There were some things they didn't want anyone to know. Just little things, like them sharing dreams, or them feeling each other's pain. And it was little things like that that kept them aloof from everyone. They had friends, of course, but they were never close enough friends to talk about something they barely mentioned to each other. Still, things like dreams could wait. They had more important things to do. So they struggled into their clothes and went down to breakfast. The walk to school wasn't long, but it was very boring, with nothing interesting to see on the way. The school was a great big rambling building, built in the Victorian era, when they were still honest about education, and so it looked a bit like a prison. It had been modernised inside in a vain attempt by someone to make it into a private school, but after no one wanted to come, it had gone bust and the government had bought it up. It squatted on its grounds like a tank, just daring anyone to move it. Its grounds were mostly surrounded by high walls, except where bordered on the massive forest that had claimed the land for miles and miles around. The leaves on the trees looked like they had been cut out of bronze, a sign that the last month of fall was well underway. Another sign was a crisp snap to the air that spoke of the soon-to-be winter. But they all had at least 2 weeks before it set in, even if this morning was dark and gloomy, with shadows seeming to flit from tree to tree in the forest. All in all, it was a forbidding sight, Olivia thought as she gazed around. The trees especially looked glowering and gloomy, but that might just be because of the dreams. She shivered and walked through the school gate.
So the prologue was okay. Not anything special, but not outright terrible. Sadly, the first chapter can't live up to the low bar it set. Starting with a dream sequence and then just info dumping everything you feel like the reader needs to know is not a good way to open a novel. But don't worry, because of course it can get worse.
The first person they saw as they walked through the gate was Thomas. He was a boy of about their own age with brown hair and a vacant expression. He was generally considered weird, but unusually people left him alone. He was a wreck of what he once was. He used to be reasonably happy, though he had always been serious, but all that had changed about 6 months ago. That was when his dad had disappeared. No one knew exactly what had happened, but it was generally thought that he had run off with another woman. Okay. It had hit Thomas hard. He had gone from normal to, well, it was as if he was a ghost these days. He just drifted around the playground. He got the odd taunt, mostly from Ellie, but no one tried to beat him up. The last person who had tried had found Thomas unexpectedly tough. He'd been left with just a broken nose, but the warning was still there. Thomas was dangerous and everyone had better leave him alone. That stopped the beatings, but not the taunts. I'm not going to explain Thomas. Today he looked terrible. There were big dark bags under his eyes like thunderclouds, and a big deep-looking scratch on his face. He sometimes did have scratches like that on him, and it had given birth to rumours that he was a self-harmer. It also made most people stay away from him even more, though some people never learned. "Hi, Thomas," said Ellie. Olivia winced. The scorn and mocking was clear in her voice. Thomas didn't seem to hear it, though. He just nodded in reply. This didn't stop Ellie. "You look terrible. Worse than usual, I mean." "I had a bad night," Thomas replied, still not rising to the bait. "I didn't get to sleep till late." I have to say, this is probably not his voice, but this was absolutely what 14-year-old Alex thought his voice was, so whatever. "You're a freak, you know that," said Ellie, changing tack and going with an obvious assault. Sure, that's how people talk. Olivia winced again. Why couldn't Ellie just let it lie? Why did she have to go on and on? "If you say so," said Thomas. He gave a little bow and said, "Then if I'm a freak, I will not stain you with my presence. Goodbye, your majesty." And with that, he turned around and left, leaving Olivia slightly puzzled and Ellie thinking that he'd just confirmed what she was saying, because he had. They continued walking across the playground towards the group of people that they usually hung out with and were stopped once again by a boy. This was one who they actually wanted to see, though. It was James. James was the most desirable boy in the playground, and he always had a group of girls following him, hanging on his every word and giggling at his every joke, wanting desperately for him to go out with them, each trying to make themselves more noticeable and attractive than the others. What the jings, young Alex? There was simply no competition for him. He was the one all the boys wanted to go out with, and he knew it. He had long, wavy blonde hair and was popular with everyone, not just the girls. You know, if I'd made him bisexual, I would have given old Alex like 50 extra points there. But no, sadly, I'm fairly sure every single person in this book is straight. He was followed everywhere by his friend Edward. He was good at football, smart enough to be clever, but not so smart that he was a geek, and when he smiled, you could see he had perfect white teeth. Olivia looked at Ellie and saw her tense, her cheeks flush, and a hesitant smile appear on her lips. It was ironic, she thought, that Ellie, as the most desirable girl in the school, wanted the only boy that wouldn't go out with her. James came towards them and smiled at Ellie. "Hi, Ellie." "Hi," she said in a voice that sounded a little stunned. He didn't seem to notice. His smile just widened. "I hope that Thomas wasn't annoying you. He really is a freak." Olivia was surprised by this. Thomas had been one of James's best friends until his father had disappeared. Edward, who also hung around with James, looked like he felt the same. He'd been Thomas's friend too. "No, it's okay," Ellie was saying. "I can handle myself, thanks." James stepped closer to her. "I'm sure you can, but he must have said something to upset you. You're really flushed." His eyes twinkled. Well, it was nothing," Ellie stammered, looking even more flustered. James moved forward, and Olivia suddenly noticed how close James was standing to Ellie. Ellie appeared to notice too, because her cheeks turned an even deeper shade of red. "No, you must be really upset." James suddenly leaned forward and kissed Ellie on the cheek. He grinned. "I hope that cheers you up," he said. Then he walked away and was gone, followed by Edward and a lot of jealous girls. 17. These people are supposed to be 17. About a mile away in the forest, one of the creatures that had been chasing Ellie and Olivia through their dreams suddenly stopped walking and stood still. It raised its nose to the air and sniffed as if it could smell something. Could it smell teenage hormones? Then it turned to roar to the rest of its gang. They roared back and started to walk through the trees. The leader strode ahead of them, occasionally knocking small trees out of their way. A bundle on its shoulder began to struggle, but the creature hit it with a sickening cracking sound. The bundle stopped moving, and the creature continued walking. It paused after about an hour and sniffed the air again. ...
If you want any advice from the person who wrote this book, don't end a chapter on a ... So that was the playground scene, which showcased that, if nothing else, young Alex had issues. By the way, if you're wondering where this is set, the answer is America. Where in America? No idea. I had decided it had to be set in the US to appeal to the market, but I didn't know enough about any of the states to convincingly base a story there. So it's just generic America. I spent 5 minutes looking for a big forest in one of the states, but somehow couldn't find one that satisfied me because young Alex also couldn't read a map, apparently. Anyway, last chapter.
Chapter 3. School was, as usual, boring, with maths, English, cooking, and history. Olivia and Ellie sat side by side through it all, with Ellie just mucking around and stopping Olivia from concentrating. Yeah, I was one of the kids who the teacher put the disruptive people next to, because I was mellow, or at least was supposed to be a good influence, and I did not like it. It never occurred to anyone that both Ellie and Olivia could be quite bright at times. They just never wanted to work. Or rather, Ellie never wanted to work, and she dragged Olivia down with her. So they were stuck in all the lowest classes except the ones where everyone was put in together. Cooking was one such subject, and today they were making a stir-fry. Boring! So they tried to make it fun. Eventually, after they'd dropped all their ingredients, again, they were made to sit and watch. But, as this was boring as well, that basically meant talking, and that, as they didn't have much to talk about, meant the dreams. Apparently, I also didn't give them, like, lives or backstories and just... Okay. These are quite hollow characters. I wonder what they mean, said Ellie, watching the class absently. They were getting out chopping boards and cucumbers. And knives. For the moment, she thought idly about taking one and stabbing the teacher, but then firmly chased the thought out of her mind. That was an evil thought. And though she detested the teacher, she would hopefully never do something like that. Evil thoughts like that were always crossing her mind, and that wasn't the worst of them. She always got rid of them and pushed them back. But no matter how hard she tried, they always came back. Being near Olivia helped, though. She dreaded what she would do if they ever got separated. I don't know. Maybe it's a warning. I mean, they started about a month ago and have been getting worse. Ellie glanced at her sister and saw that she was looking grey and drawn. Obviously, getting killed each night for the month could take it out of you. She gave her hand a little squeeze and turned her attention back to the class. The teacher was just telling them how to chop their cucumbers when there was a sudden clattering and a blur of movement. After that was over, which was about 2 seconds, Thomas's cucumber was in a lot of very thinly sliced pieces. Very well done, Thomas, the teacher said weakly. How... ... Where did you learn to do that? My mum and I live with my uncle now. He owns a sushi bar. Ah, okay, the teacher just trailed off with embarrassment and then, as some teachers do, just ignored it. Turning to the rest of the class, she said, Well, now if you all chop your cucumbers... Ellie turned back to Olivia, knowing that she had just seen further proof that Thomas was a freak. Maybe they're to warn us that Thomas is going to chop us into little bits. I wouldn't put anything past that weirdo. She expected Olivia to just agree with her like she always did, but she got a surprise. Just leave him alone, will you, Ellie? Olivia said with unexpected hostility in her voice. You always go on at people. He's lost his dad. We should know how he feels. We should be the ones being sorry for him, not being the first ones to poke fun at him. Or rather, you are always the first one to poke fun at him. You always do it as well. Why can't you just... ... Question mark. I'm fairly sure I cut that sentence off because I didn't know what to put next. She would probably have gone on like that if Ellie hadn't kicked her. Hard. Then, wincing through the pain she had inflicted on herself, Ellie whispered in Olivia's ear. What's up with you? He's a weirdo, a freak, a psycho. He doesn't deserve our sympathy. And anyway, she said, laughing slightly, unless his mum and dad never met him, he gets an annoying twin, and he starts to feel any pain that that annoying twin feels, then he will have no idea what we've been through. Now shut up about him. She looked over at him and saw that James was standing quite close. He looked up and saw her looking at him. He grinned and rolled his eyes while jerking his head towards Thomas, as if agreeing with Ellie. Ellie blushed, remembering the kiss that he'd planted on her cheek, remembering the feeling of his breath in her ear. What? And how she'd felt, a mixture of melting inside and feeling like she'd been about to faint. Even remembering it made her feel almost the same way, and she longed for James to... Sorry. Even remembering it made her feel almost the same way, and she longed for James to take her in his arms and hold her hand, thankfully, ... She was still thinking about this when the bell went and they left for lunch. She shook her head, grabbed her bag, and left with the others, followed by a burning smell and the sound of a fellow student getting grilled almost as badly as his stir-fry. You know, the actual descriptions I use in here aren't the worst, but good grief, I'm using them to describe terrible, terrible things. Like, the actual writing itself is okay, which it should be, because I spent 3 years going over this, and over this, and over this, and over this, but the plot, well, one, hasn't actually started yet, the characters are paper thin, and, yeah, this is terrible. And, I can remember this next section, so I apologize in advance. She was probably thinking about him all through English. That was why she wasn't talking much. Olivia didn't mind. She sat next to Joan, and they had a good long chat. It was there they could have one in which Ellie wasn't constantly interrupting. Their chat wasn't about anything exciting, just about the upcoming dance. "So, who are you taking, Joan?" asked Olivia. Joan shrugged. "I can't think of anyone. James would be nice, but he's all over Ellie." Olivia shot a glance at her twin, but even this didn't seem to have penetrated the sunny bubble her head was locked in. "I guess, maybe Edward? How about you?" "No one," Olivia replied. Joan looked surprised. "Really? Because I thought... ... Young Alex really liked ellipses." Olivia didn't get time to hear about what Joan thought, because at that moment, Mr. Matherley, their English teacher, bounded in. Mr. Matherley was a young man in his early 20s, who seemed to have got his head stuck in the Middle Ages. He had long brown hair and wore a long jacket that he probably thought made him look like a private detective. He was generally considered insane, but happy to be so. He exploded into the room in a whoosh of nervous energy. "Right, my young cursers," he bellowed out joyously. "Anyone ever read a Shakespeare play for fun?" Not surprisingly, no one put their hand up. He wasn't too bothered, though. "Didn't expect you to, and you're going to be doing it today. Instead, we're going to write stories." A general flicker of interest floated around the class. This might actually be interesting. Even Ellie emerged briefly from her dreaming. "Now, I just described you as cursors. Anyone want to tell me what a curse is?" Some boy in the back raised his hand. "Haven't bad stuff happened to you?" Mr. Matherley sighed and put his heads in his hands. "That's the most basic answer you could have given me. Bad things happening? For shame, Ewan." "Oh, I had a friend called Ewan. I'm pretty sure that was just, me throwing shade at him." "What a curse is a really nasty thing a witch or something would put on you. The best curses are inventive. Whoever said that I had to put up with you lot wasn't. But that's beside the point. I once knew of this curse where if the person cursed heard a bird singing..." Olivia tuned out. Mr. Matherley tended to go on rambling stories that he made up as he went along. She gazed around for a bit, then came back to hear, "And then they found the foot." She was suddenly very glad she hadn't listened. The pupils that had were looking slightly green. "Anyway, curses play a very important role in Macbeth, the play by William Shakespeare, so if you'll all open your books and read quietly, I can get some sleep." He frisbeed the books out, narrowly missing decapitating several students, then settled down on his desk, closing his eyes. The students weren't fooled. Mr. Matherley often pretended to be asleep, so he could catch them off guard. He even occasionally pretended to snore. The offshoot of this was that he really could go to sleep in class and no one would know. One boy at the back raised his head. "Sir, you said we weren't doing Shakespeare today." Mr. Matherley opened his eyes and smiled. "I lied," he said. "I do that." Then he closed his eyes again.
Right, so here's my explanation for Mr. Mathley. I thought that energetic and cool were the same things. People who kept moving about kinetically and kept changing direction and were zany. So I legitimately thought that a ball of chaos like that would have been a cool teacher, and if I was ever a teacher, that was the sort of teacher I would like to be. So I guess add one to the weird self-insert character counter.
Olivia could see that Ellie was still thinking about James on the way home. It was the dreamy look on her face. She knew she had to say something. "So what did you think of school?" she asked. Ellie nodded absently. It was mostly boring. Olivia tried again. "Did you like HE? I don't actually know if that's what you call it in America. Home economics." Ellie suddenly focused. "Not really. It was just more proof that something is badly wrong with Thomas." Olivia sighed. "He's not even here. Why do you make fun of him?" "Why do you stick up for him?" Ellie asked. "Do you fancy him or something?" "No," Olivia said forcefully, feeling a deep blush spread across her cheeks. Ellie was delighted. "You do! You fancy Thomas!" she crowed. She continued in an almost reasonable tone of voice, with mockery on the edge. "You shouldn't keep it in, you know. You should tell the weirdo how you feel about him. It'll probably be the happiest thing that's happened to him in his whole pathetic life." Olivia felt a sudden anger flood through her. "I shouldn't keep it in? Well, what about you and James? Shouldn't you tell him how you feel? It might stop him playing about with you and making us all sick." Ellie's face turned thundercloud black. "And what would you know about all this? You never had boys interested in you. It's just like what Mr. Matherley was talking about. You're cursed. You're cursed never to get close to someone. To die sad and alone. And every time you do get near someone, something terrible will happen." Olivia was about to yell back when a sudden dizziness shot through her. It was so bad she had to clutch a nearby wall for support. She was barely aware that Ellie was doing the same. She heard a sudden shout and felt a hand grab her by the arm and help hold her up. She looked up into the concerned face of Thomas. "Are you okay?" he asked. Before Olivia could reply, Ellie did. She shook off the hand that Thomas had put on her and yelled at him. "Of course we're all right. Now why the hell were you following us?" Thomas shrugged. "I wasn't following you. I was simply on my way home when I saw you two stagger. I wanted to know if I could help. Could I give you a hand getting home?" "No, you can't. We're fine. Now get lost." It was then that Olivia blacked out. ... The creature seemed to again catch the smell that it had before and started walking again, changing direction slightly. The bundle over its shoulder seemed to wake up and again began to struggle and thrash about. The creature threw it to the ground and kicked it until it stopped moving. The sack that it was in ripped and black fur showed through, though it was matted with blood. The creature seemed satisfied, though, and picked up the sack and carried on its way towards the school that Ellie and Olivia were in. Olivia woke up and saw that she was in her room. She groaned. There was a terrible pain in her head, and she felt like she'd just done a marathon. Her throat was bone dry, and the light hurt her eyes. She lay back down and felt a glass being put to her lips. She took a drink and felt cool water gush down her throat. The headache began to clear, and she felt better, though still very tired. She opened her eyes and saw Ellie staring down at her from where she sat on the side of the bed, concern painted all over her face. "Are you all right?" she asked. Olivia nodded, then winced. "How did I get here?" she asked weakly. "Thomas brought you. He just picked you up and carried you back. He's gone now." Her face showed that she was angry, though Olivia wasn't sure whether it was because of not being able to help her or Thomas carrying her. She knew that she was also still mad with her about what she had said. "Listen, Ellie, I'm sorry for what I said earlier. You know what you're doing with James." Ellie nodded. "Yeah, I do, but your apology is appreciated." Olivia smiled weakly. "What was all that rubbish about me dying sad and alone?" she asked. Ellie shrugged. "I don't know, it just seemed the right thing to say, but I'm sorry, though you were asking for it." They embraced, and from the way that Ellie hugged her, Olivia knew that her twin had been really worried about her. "I don't fancy Thomas, you know," she whispered into her twin's ear. Ellie let go of her and sat looking at her. "I do know," she said, "because you're not stupid."
And that's where we'll finish for today. So far, after 26 pages, a prologue, and 3 chapters, basically nothing has happened. We've learned that the twins have psychic dreams of each other and go to school. Here's my writer tip of the day. Have something happen within this space of a novel. It's okay to start slow, but you have to give people something to latch onto. And I don't think the current cast of characters gives us that at all. But yeah, it gets worse. It gets so much worse. So please, join me for this voyage of discovery through past Alex's really hard work. I put 3 years of my life into this, and I think that's very amusing. So, see you next time, and have a lovely day.